cousin punished my son in a way that nearly ended in tragedy, and she thinks it was just discipline. But the way I discipline is by locking her up in a cell. I never imagined that my cousin Ruth, 34, would put my son's life in danger and, when I confronted her, act as if she hadn't done anything wrong. Ruth's son had his confirmation last weekend. The ceremony itself went off without incident. It was long, a bit boring to be honest, but nothing out of the ordinary. The real trouble started at the reception, which was held at the country club. While the adults were chatting and socializing inside, the kids were playing outside in a designated area. I checked on Alex several times during the event, and everything seemed fine. There were other adults around, so I wasn't worried about him. At no point did I notice anything wrong, and I never thought Ruth would take him somewhere else. That's why I was shocked when Ruth pulled me aside and told me that Alex had been acting rudely, talking back, and being disrespectful to the event staff. He's never misbehaved at family gatherings, and I found it hard to believe that he'd suddenly start disrespecting adults. Before I could even ask what had happened, she waved me off, dismissing it. She told me not to worry, that she had already handled it. I asked where Alex was, and with a mocking smile she replied, "Oh, he's just taking a little break in the car." At first, I didn't understand what she meant. Then, it hit me. She had locked my son in the car. I didn't stop to argue or ask why, I just ran. I dashed out of the building at full speed, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The summer heat was stifling. When I saw my car in the parking lot, I thought the worst had happened. The doors were locked, and inside, Alex was crying, drenched in sweat, his face red, his little hands pounding on the window, gasping for air. Panic set in. I grabbed the handles and pulled with all my might, but the doors wouldn't budge. My fingers were shaking so much I could barely hold the phone to dial 911. That's when Eric reached me. As soon as he saw Alex trapped inside, he didn't hesitate for a second. He grabbed a rock and smashed the passenger side window. The glass shattered, but at that moment nothing mattered, because it wasn't my car. I lunged in and pulled Alex out. His skin was burning to the touch. He'd been stuck there for who knows how long under the scorching heat. By then, a crowd had gathered. The country club staff rushed over, and someone had already called the paramedics. And then, Ruth appeared. She looked annoyed, neither guilty nor worried, just irritated that people were making a fuss. And if that wasn't enough, she added something to make it worse, like, "Oh, he was only in there for a few minutes. Maybe now he'll learn not to be so bratty." I'd never felt such rage in my life. My hands were trembling so badly that I had to grab Eric's arm to keep from lunging at her. Eric was tense, as if he were ready to hit someone. He turned to Ruth and asked if she'd lost her mind. He told her she could have killed Alex. She had the nerve to say, "It wasn't that hot. I left the window slightly open." Something she hadn't done. Eric looked like he was ready to strike her. The paramedics arrived and confirmed that Alex was suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration. They immediately began administering fluids and checking his vital signs. They told us that if we had found him any later, it could have been much worse. And yet, Ruth remained unmoved. She said, "They're so dramatic, my kids would have been fine." I told her we might as well try that on one of the cars and see how it holds up. I was so fed up that we ended up calling the police. Ruth's confidence finally evaporated. Her husband ran over, trying to calm things down. He was just as awful, saying it was only a parenting decision and that we were ruining a family event over a simple punishment. Eric told him that they were out of their minds and that locking a child in a hot car was not discipline. Before things got completely out of control, the police arrived. The officers took statements from us and several witnesses. And when they heard Ruth admit that she had locked Alex in the car as punishment, the officers' faces hardened. They arrested her on the spot. Ruth's husband started yelling at the officers, insisting it was ridiculous and that we were ruining her son's confirmation. One of the officers pulled Eric aside and strongly suggested that we press charges for endangering a minor. And we will. Now, Ruth's husband is trying to defend her, saying that I'm destroying the family. My aunt and Ruth's sisters are calling me a horrible person for involving the police. I don't care. Ruth locked my son in a car when it was 32 degrees out. She deserves everything that comes her way. Edit. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the support and outrage on behalf of Alex. I've seen that some people have asked about certain details of this story, so I want to clarify them here. 1. How did Ruth have access to my car? Some people were confused about how Ruth managed to lock Alex in our car. I should have explained better, it wasn't our car. It was Ruth's car, so she had her own keys to it. That's why I didn't mind Eric breaking her window. 2. Why didn't Alex open the door from the inside? Many asked why Alex didn't just open the door. The truth is, he tried. Ruth activated the child lock on the rear doors before putting him in the car. Alex was trapped. The front doors were also locked, and he was too scared to think clearly. 3. How long was he in the car? We don't have an exact time, but based on the last time I saw Alex playing and when we found him, it was between 15 and 20 minutes. It might not sound like much, but in a car without air conditioning, with outside temperatures over 30 degrees, it was enough time for him to start overheating seriously. The paramedics told us that if more time had passed, it could have been much worse, possibly a heat stroke. 4. Why didn't anyone else help? This is what infuriates me the most. There were people outside, but no one realized what was happening. The parking lot was separated from the event area, and because Ruth left the window barely cracked, Alex's cries weren't loud enough to be heard. It wasn't until Eric and I ran out, shouting, that people turned in that direction. 5. Was this really an arrestable offense? Absolutely. The police didn't hesitate to arrest Ruth after hearing what she did. She admitted to the officers that she had locked Alex in the car as punishment. She never denied it. Given the heat, the duration, and Alex's medical distress, it was classified as endangering a minor. That's why she was immediately taken into custody. 6. Why is the family defending her? This is the hardest to explain. My family has always treated Ruth differently. She's what many call the golden child. Even after she endangered my son, there were people who protected her. At this point, I don't care what the rest of the family thinks. Ruth didn't make a simple mistake. She made a deliberate decision that could have killed my son. I hope this clears up any doubts. At the end of the day, nothing justifies what Ruth did. Neither family loyalty nor an excuse about discipline. She endangered my son's life, and now she will face the consequences. I'm going to press charges and I'm not backing down, no matter how much my family begs me. Update 1. She spent the night in jail. Today she was released on bail and already has a court date for charges of endangering a minor. And well, the consequences of her actions were immediate, but not in the way I expected. I naively thought that after being arrested she would at least show some remorse, that she would realize how close she came to causing serious harm to a child and feel even a bit of guilt. But instead, she dug in even further. As soon as she was out on bail, her family went into full-on defense mode. Her husband started calling everyone, insisting that it had all been blown out of proportion and that I was just an overprotective mom. He never apologized for what his wife did. Instead, he claimed she was only doing it because she couldn't be strict with a kid, a trait he said I lacked. My aunt wants me to drop the charges, saying that even if she made a small mistake, it shouldn't ruin her life. A mistake. That's how they were calling it. Locking my son in a car at 32 degrees, leaving him until he was red, crying, and dehydrated wasn't a mistake, it was child abuse. I'm not going to let anyone manipulate me into thinking otherwise. At first, I ignored their calls and messages because no matter what they did, I was going to press the charges. But then Ruth took to social media. Instead of telling her version of the events, she posted one where she was being punished for nothing, claiming that she had only disciplined my son, without specifying the punishment, and that his mother was just looking for any excuse to ruin her life. I wasn't going to stand for it. A week after the incident, another family gathering was scheduled, the birthday of one of my younger cousins. I wasn't planning to go, but when I heard that Ruth and her husband would be there, pushing their version of the story, I made up my mind. If they wanted to manipulate the narrative, I was going to set the record straight once and for all. Eric hesitated, but he knows me well enough to understand that I had to do it. Not just for myself, but for Alex. Because someday he might hear different versions of what happened, and I wanted to make sure the truth was loud and clear. When I arrived, I could feel the tension in the air immediately. Some family members gave me awkward looks, not sure whose side they were on. Others completely ignored me, so I knew they were on Ruth's side. And there was Ruth, sitting in a corner with her trademark smirk, looking completely calm. She had everyone wrapped around her little finger, so she thought she'd already won. But I told everyone we needed to talk, and I recounted my version of the events. Some relatives had been there that day, but they didn't arrive at the parking lot until after we'd rescued Alex. Other family members hadn't even come for various reasons, so they assumed I'd just yelled at her and that's why we were arguing. But once I explained what really happened, there was no doubt, and people began to switch sides. In fact, those who had been on Ruth's side started changing their minds. Some even went pale as they realized they'd been supporting the wrong person. I wasn't done yet. I pulled out the medical report, the official document that detailed Alex's condition, confirming dehydration, elevated body temperature, and emotional distress. I read every single detail aloud. Ruth stormed out of the room in a fury. After that night, the story completely changed. Ruth and her husband stopped playing the victim, because they no longer had any way to support their lie. The relatives who had initially backed her fell silent, either out of shame or because they finally understood the gravity of what had happened. And most importantly, no one bought Ruth's lies anymore. This isn't over. Because I've decided, I'm going to sue her in addition to the charges she's already facing. Ruth can try to play the victim in court and see how that goes. Update 2. From the day I had Ruth arrested, I knew I would take this all the way, no matter how many relatives got involved or tried to downplay it. Ruth's trial was a complete disaster for her. She tried to play the victim. She cried in court, saying she never meant to hurt Alex, that she was only trying to teach him a lesson, that she thought the window was open enough, and that she was only going to leave him there for a moment until he calmed down. But it was her own words that betrayed her. There were witnesses who saw that not a single window was open, and that she continued to be indifferent even after it was clear things had gone downhill. Up to that point, she still insisted that maybe now he'd learn not to be so bratty. Her entire defense fell apart. She was found guilty of endangering a minor. She didn't serve any jail time, but she was sentenced to probation, mandatory parenting classes, and worst of all, a restraining order. Officially, she was forbidden from coming near Alex. That should have been the end of it, if Alex weren't my son. I wasn't done. The criminal case was one thing, but I wanted real consequences, ones that would really hurt her. Alex had nightmares for weeks. He refused to go anywhere without me or his dad. He had recurring dreams of being locked in dark places with no way out. So, I took Ruth and her husband to civil court. I sued them for emotional distress, medical expenses, and punitive damages. Her husband, the same one who had been screaming on social media about how I was ruining Ruth's life, suddenly changed his tune. He pleaded with me to settle, saying we could agree on a figure and put an end to it. I refused. I wanted this to go to trial. I wanted every detail of what Ruth did to be laid out before a judge. And in the end, I won. It's not so much about the amount, which is over $50,000, as it is about the precedent this lawsuit sets. If she's thinking of pulling another stunt like this, whether with Alex or some other kid, she'd better think twice. Update 3. It's been several months since Ruth was convicted of endangering a minor, and the full extent of her actions has come to light. I expected that, after everything, she would disappear from the radar and reflect on what she'd done. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. I don't believe she feels any remorse, even as her life keeps getting worse. Maybe after so many blows life deals you, you eventually realize you're doing something wrong, and that's why karma's been so harsh on you. But in Ruth's case, it seems the universe is to blame, not her. The most heartbreaking consequence of Ruth's behavior wasn't the loss of her reputation or even her marriage. It was the devastating effect her actions had on her own son, Seth. For weeks after the incident, Seth became withdrawn. His father, now Ruth's ex, has said that Seth began having nightmares about what happened to Alex, and even worse, he started fearing that his mother might do the same to him. Because you see, Seth was there that day. He witnessed everything with his own eyes. He saw Alex crying, struggling to breathe, and he also saw his mother act as if it was no big deal. To young Seth's mind, it made no sense that his own mother could be so cruel. He started asking questions like, why did mommy do that? And, would she ever lock me in a car if I misbehaved? I'm sure Ruth tried to smooth things over by telling Seth that he wasn't like Alex and that he'd never deserve a punishment like that. In the end, not only was Alex left emotionally scarred, but so was Ruth's own son, the child she claimed to love so dearly. Seth couldn't escape the trauma. He began to reject her, avoiding any contact and backing away whenever she tried to comfort him. When Ruth's ex saw how Seth reacted to his mother, it was the last straw. Yes, the same man who once claimed that his wife was only trying to teach a lesson, but when it came to his own son, he wasn't so sure, especially considering the consequences of that discipline, even though it wasn't directly applied to Seth. He filed for full custody of Seth. And to Ruth's horror, he won. And yes, Ruth tried to spin the story again, claiming that it was her husband who treated Seth badly and that's why she wanted a divorce. But most of us know who's lying and who isn't. We've been with Seth, and he's told his side of the story. Despite all her claims of being a good mother, which is impossible, Ruth is now only allowed supervised visits with her son. And Seth flat out refuses to even consider that option. The divorce came shortly after, with her ex cutting all ties with her. His circle didn't want anything to do with Ruth either, and he eventually moved away with Seth to start over somewhere else. I hope that, by being away from Ruth, her ex loses all the toxicity she brings. I don't know, it seems he's finally woken up. I just hope it works out for Seth's sake. And Ruth? She's completely alone. Not only is she out of work and friendless, but she's also been cut off by most of the family, who don't want anything to do with her. The few who still speak to her are probably just waiting for the next scandal to erupt. I thought it was over with her. I really did. But a few weeks ago, Ruth showed up at my house. I was outside with Alex when I saw her car pull up. I stood my ground and called the police before telling her she had to leave. Ruth got out of her car in a rage, looking like someone who hadn't slept in days. She started yelling immediately, calling me every name in the book. You ruined my life, she screamed. You took my child from me. She had the audacity to say that I was responsible for her losing her marriage and her family. Alex, who was standing beside me, immediately hid behind me and started shaking. I told him to come inside and stay there, but it was clear he was still upset about his aunt showing up again. That was the moment I lost my patience. I stepped forward and said, "You brought this on yourself, Ruth. Now get off my property, because if you stay 1 second longer, the police who are on their way might just come for you." Her expression changed from anger to pure surprise, as if she couldn't believe I was no longer afraid and was willing to give her exactly what she deserved to protect my son. She said she didn't believe I had done that, though I already had, but I told her to stick around and see for herself. She stormed off in a fury, but not before shouting, "This isn't over." But it is over, for her, at least. Since she violated the restraining order, it's the end of the line. To start with, Ruth is jobless, friendless, and estranged from most of the family. Her reputation is completely ruined, and no one defends her anymore. Every time her name comes up at a family gathering, people change the subject or make snide remarks about her. It's as if she's become a pariah. Her ex moved away with Seth, gaining full custody, because he's basically terrified of his own mother. So, things are looking very, very bleak for her. And if that wasn't enough, she was arrested again for violating the restraining order. This little game she thought she had with me is over. Not only has she lost, she's been humiliated. It's time for her to face the reality around her. It was a setback for Alex to see his aunt, but we're hoping he won't have to see her for a long time. That will help him heal. He's receiving professional help, for those asking about that. So we're just waiting for the day when Alex shows improvement. And if those improvements mean that Ruth has to stay far away, and not by her own choice, then as his mother, I'll make sure it happens. Update 4. My responsibility as a mother is to protect my son, and that's exactly what I've done by enforcing the restraining order. Even though I regret that the situation isn't what we had hoped for. We filed a new complaint against Ruth, and due to her violation, she will spend about 3 months in jail. We hired a lawyer to help us with the complaint, with the intention of including the threat and other factors so that Ruth would receive a harsher sentence, hopefully of several years. However, the judge ruled that since this was her first violation and there hadn't been any physical aggression against Alex, it didn't warrant more than 3 months. He even mentioned that in some cases, first-time offenses are only punished with a fine. I then wondered what a restraining order is really good for. We have 3 months to prepare before she's released, because we know that jail isn't going to calm Ruth down and she might even show signs of further violence. If she's been erratic these past few months, I can't imagine the impact that confinement might have on her mind. Our lawyer has put us in touch with a specialist in domestic violence cases to find the best way to mitigate any risk this woman might pose. To be honest, I'm scared at this point because I don't know what Ruth might be capable of next. And the lack of justice that truly acts only adds to my uncertainty. Still, I remain resolute. Eric and I will protect Alex at all costs, no matter how difficult or expensive it becomes. Update 5. These months of preparation turned out to be in vain, but at least they gave me some peace and feeling like we had everything under control. We've taken measures to ensure that Ruth couldn't hurt us, though I won't detail them in case she ever reads this. Fortunately, it hasn't been necessary because Ruth has decided to move away. I wouldn't say she's moved to the other side of the country, but almost as far as that. It's a sad and pathetic ending, but in Ruth's case, it's fair and necessary for everyone else. In this situation, her leaving has been best for our peace of mind. She still has the restraining order, she can hardly see her son, and most of the family has cut her out of their lives. In fact, at this point I'd say the entire family has done so, because even her own mother has said that this is the best decision Ruth could have made. As for Alex, these months without any sign of Ruth have done him a world of good. And when we told him that she's gone, possibly for good, I could tell that his relief was even greater. I hope this is the final chapter of my story and that I won't have to come back to say that Ruth is in this city again. Even so, we still have measures in place for her, and breaking another restraining order will be a bit more severe than the first time.